Welcome back, guys. This is Jason, KM4ACK. What do you do with all of this for the Raspberry Pi? Stick around and we'll get right to it. Before we get to today's content, I've got to give a shout out to these guys. They're my latest patrons over on Patreon. If you'd like to help support the channel, I'll leave a link to Patreon down in the description below. Patrons get early access to YouTube videos. They also get priority email support and exclusive content that's not released anywhere else. So after putting out the Raspberry Pi setup video a couple of weeks ago, I got several emails from different people, a couple from patrons in particular, that wanted to know, how do you hook all this stuff up? I kind of covered the setup in that video from a software side, but I didn't cover any of the hardware side of things. So let's take a few minutes today and take a look at that. Let me bring you guys in a little bit closer. Okay, let's take this jumble of components and see if we can't get everything hooked up. I'm going to move that power cable out of the way for right now. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the Sunburned Soundcard. Now, I have pulled mine out of the plastic case and applied heat shrink to protect the board. The primary reason of doing this is just to make the footprint of this a bit smaller because we have very limited space on the back of the Raspberry Pi when it comes to the 4 ports. Now, you could always add a USB hub, I suppose, if you wanted it, but I'm trying to keep this package as small as possible. So if you take those out of the plastic housing that they come in and just put some heat shrink on it, they're not quite as durable, but I haven't run into any issues so far. So this is our sound card. This is our sound card cable. This is the one that I got off of eBay from Hamdapter. It comes with the 6-pan mini DIN on one end and then two 3.5 millimeter cables on the other end. I bought the 1-foot version. That's plenty of cable, and I don't have to deal with a lot of extra hanging out the back. So you take the one that's marked data in, and we're going to plug that up into the green port on the back of the Sunburned Soundcard. And we're going to take the one marked data out and plug it into the pink port on the back of the Sunburned Soundcard. That's it. That one is ready to go. So we'll leave that one right here for a moment. Let's talk about the GPS for a second. Again, I have stripped it out of its original case and covered this with heat shrink, trying to shrink that footprint as much as possible. The only downside with this method is I can't really see the green light to know when it's got a lock. I may go back and trim some of this off just so I can see that green light blinking when it does get a lock. Now, you can take your GPS unit and plug it directly into the back of the Raspberry Pi. One word here, don't use the USB 3.0 connections. I find that the USB 2.0 works a little bit better. So the 3s are marked in blue in case you don't know, and the 2s are in black. This is a Pi 4. If you're running a Pi 3, they'll all be black because the Pi 3 did not have USB 3.0. So you can take the GPS and plug it directly into the Raspberry Pi. Having it stripped out of its original case gives us more room to work with so we can get extra things in here. Now, with all of that said, what I prefer to do is I prefer a USB extension cable. So we got the male on one end and we've got the female on the other. So typically what I will do is I take my GPS plug that into the female side of the USB cable, and then take my male end and I'll go ahead and plug that in to the Raspberry Pi. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, it just gives me a little bit of freedom to move this thing out of the way if I'm getting any kind of interference, or just to maybe leave the cable hanging directly out the back and away from me so that it's not in my way when I'm operating. So we've got that plugged in. The next thing we need to plug in is the sound card. So I'm going to go ahead and insert the sound card right above. I was just making sure I had that orientated right above the GPS extension. Now, if you are running the GPS right on the very top of your board, I would put it in the top port instead of in the bottom one. Since I'm using the extension cable, it's not an issue with me, but it's just one less thing putting it on top to be blocking your GPS signal. So if you put it underneath your sound card, you do have a little bit of blockage here with the sound card itself. Next up, we've got the cat cable for the 891. Now, the 891 uses a regular, plain, old school USB cable. So I can't remember if this is style A or B or whatever it is. But anyway, it's the old one with the big receptor on this end and the regular USB on this side. I'll leave a link to this down in the description of this video. But let's go ahead and plug that into the back of the Raspberry Pi. So I'm going to use the USB 3 right here. And then the last item I have is my little external thumb drive that just gives me a little bit more storage. Now, I do want to make sure that this plugs into the USB 3.0 just to give me a little bit more speed there. Most of these, well, I can't say most. Half of them really don't matter where you put them. The sound card will go in either place. The cat cable can go in either place. I've never had an issue putting it in either one. The GPS needs to be on USB 2.0, and the external thumb drive, I prefer it on USB 3.0 just to give me faster data speeds. It's not critical, but that's just a personal preference of mine. Once we have that, then we have two cables here. Let me see if I can get some of these uncrossed a little bit. We've got two cables that we need to get into the back of the radio. We've got the cat cable, and the cat cable is going to plug up here, so just make sure that is orientated correctly, and we can go ahead and plug that one in there. Then we have the other end of the sound card. Now, if you're not familiar with the mini DIN connectors, there's a couple of marks on them that tell you which direction is up. Probably can't see that on camera, but there is an arrow right here on the black case itself, and then there's a little indentation in the tip of the connector that indicates up. So we'll take it and rotate that correctly, and it's going to go right beside our cat cable. Now guys, when you're plugging these things up, be careful that you definitely have this one orientated correctly. The pins inside of these are a bit fragile. If you try to force it, you may end up breaking or at least bending one of those pins. So do be cautious when you're plugging that up. Don't apply too much force. The last thing we've got is the power cable for the Raspberry Pi itself. Now this is the power board that I've told you guys about in several other videos. It's got a 5.5 millimeter barrel connector. One of these days I may try to put power poles on this, but I hadn't gotten there yet. I did make up just a short pigtail that's got the 5.5 on one end, and it's got power poles on the other. I kept it as short as possible. I can always add an extension cable to this end if I need it when I'm in the field. So that plugs up there. And that's it, guys. That's the way I connect up the Raspberry Pi and all of the components to the radio. Now, if you're running a Signal Link instead of running a Sunburned Soundcard, let's get this back out of the way. You've got two changes to make. You're going to get rid of the Sunburned Soundcard and this cable that comes in here. And then you will have two similar plugs coming out of your Signal Link. The round mini DIN connector goes into the back of the radio, and the USB coming off the Signal Link would plug into one of the USB ports. That's really the only difference there is between connecting the Sunburned and connecting the Signal Link. Now there's some software differences, but as far as the hardware, that's the only differences. All right guys, I hope you found this helpful. Be sure to give us a thumbs up before you head off, and we will see you guys on the next video. Until then, 7-3.